Christians will say, "Oh, I don't watch any TV or any movies because sex and violence," and they don't watch any of it. Then the other side would just sort of like, it's just entertainment. And they both are uneducated and both are being manipulated.
All right, so here we are, Warriors. How we doing? Welcome to Warrior Chamber Studios, and you are in the Warrior Chamber. And I have a special guest with me, and this is Brian Godawa. You can see some of the things that he's authored in the back. I mean, he's a screenwriter, he's a novelist. Do you still write for CRI, Brian, a little bit here and there?
No, not lately.
Not lately, okay, but you have in the past.
Yeah.
And also, you're an award-winning screenwriter, and you wrote To End All Wars with I have to put the definite article in front of his name, the Kiefer Sutherland, because Kiefer Sutherland's the man. I mean, Flatliners, Lost Boys, and 24. That 24, you cannot forget 24. But anyway,
yeah,
Brian, I wanted to bring you on. I wanted to talk to you about a couple books that you got. I just finished up reading this one right here. End Times Bible Prophecy. It's not what they told you. Amazing primer. That's what I've been telling my friends. I'll tell them, look, you might recognize this guy right here, Gary DeMar. What I'll do is I'll tell them, hey, if you're going to get into preterism, you're going to get into things leading up to 80, 70, what happened in that generation when Jesus was talking about Matthew 24, I say, hey, get Godawa's book and get this book. They're great primers. Get into those. Yeah. I go, get into those bad boys. So you are with Uncle Gary. You're in that echelon of guys. But anyway, Mr. Godawa, tell me, I already introduced you, but tell me a little bit about yourself that I maybe missed. I know you got a new book that came out. Tell us about some of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I've been, writing movies for a long time. And I would say about 13 years ago, actually, I had a couple difficult years, as everyone does in the business, where didn't make much money selling screenplays. So I had to expand my reinvent myself, and figure out other ways of sort of trying to get my storytelling out there and make some money. And I had been actually writing a screenplay for what I thought would be a truly unique story that would be both Hollywood-oriented and open for Christians and Jews who would love the Bible, because it would have both the sort of ancient world and fantastical beings as well as, the biblical story. And it was basically the story of Noah. And I called my screenplay Noah Primeval, and I was going around town trying to get interest in. And I was never a big name, so it's tough when you're trying to schlep a $150 million idea around town. And then I found out Darren Aronofsky was making his movie, and I realized, okay, well, that's it. I'm not going to get my chance. And I thought, well, how can I get my story out? Because it was so exciting what I was studying when I wrote that thing, and and I realized, you know what, I got to get out as a novel, And so I wrote it as a novel within the year and got it out long before the movie came out. And I was worried, will my book have similar things to what his movie has? And no, there's not at all. His ended up being a godless atheistic parable for environmental earth worship, and it really didn't have many similarities at all with mine, other than maybe Noah was more of a warrior type tribal leader. So that was kind of interesting, but it opened up my research into that, where I looked into some of the most difficult, weird passages in the Bible, not the least of which, or shall we say the most weird of which for me, had always been Genesis 6:1-4, where it talks about how the heavenly sons of God saw the daughters of men, came down to earth, mated with them, and bore them the Nehphilim giants, who were warriors, mighty men of old. And it was just so weird, sound mythological and all that. And but it was so fascinating because as I studied it, I came to discover that it's not just a strange anomaly of the giants that show up in the Bible, Goliath, and
Right.
there's giants in the Promised Land, but that there's an entire storyline through the Bible that was just fascinating that I had to tell. And I ended up taking that one novel, Noah Primeval, and I turned it into a series called Chronicles of the Nehphilim that ended up being 8 novels in itself, another series that's continuing those stories called Chronicles of the Watchers, and a third series called Chronicles of the Apocalypse, where I apply that same worldview concept to the origin story of the book of Revelation, as I like to call it. And so it was this amazing opening of publishing novels. And interestingly, I could not get a Christian publisher because my novels were too. It was my first novel, so I probably wasn't that great of a writer at the time. but but also there's a lot of sex and violence in there because there's sex and violence in the Bible, and I come from a Hollywood background, so I mean, I whatever. I couldn't get a Christian publisher. I couldn't get an agent to rep me, so I was right at the crest of when Kindle self-publishing was coming out. I thought, well, might as well do that. Might as well publish it myself. Well, now I've got this entire library of novels, and I'm just selling like hotcakes on Amazon. Oh, if you look at the top 10, top 20 categories of biblical fiction and religious fiction and Christian science fiction and fantasy on Amazon, my series almost dominates the top 10 still after 10 years. And it's just been an exciting, it's an exciting experience. And so that's what I've been focusing on lately, doing a little bit more of that. But, last year I released a movie, a political satire I wrote called My Son Hunter,
Yeah.
and about Hunter Biden's laptop. So I'm still doing movies occasionally. And yeah, it's been a fun road, but that's sort of my novel excursion. And then yeah, I've had my Hollywood background, but about 3 years ago, actually, I finally escaped LA and moved to Texas.
Snake
Sick of it.
Plissken, you escaped from LA. You got out of there.
Exactly. In fact, I should send you I made a Photoshop version of the Escape from LA poster with me as Snake Plissken and my wife behind me. And it says, Snake is leaving LA or something like that, And so.
I want to show you this right here. Look at this right here.
Oh, awesome. Escape from New York. Yeah, classic.
Yeah. I got my room. My room's decked out. Kurt Russell's one of my heroes, but yeah, whatever. So I was a Californian too. So I did my escape as well, but I was in Clovis. It's in Fresno County. So that's where I was. I made my escape 3 years ago. So here I am in
Where'd you move?
Arizona. So
yeah.
I dubbed myself a Calizonian now since I'm from California and I'm in Arizona.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a whole slew of California expats here in Texas, and I have to say that we have found quite a few of them, and a couple of my best friends from California also moved to the area, not just to be around, not to be around us, but because Texas is another common area that a lot of us go to, and those of us who like to have a little bit more freedom and guns. And so a lot of people here. It turns out my best friends that we hang out with are ex LA or ex Southern Cal people, and I think that's because we all moved here deliberately to escape. So we all have a common background, but we all also loved California. I mean, it's unbeatable weather. It's literally the best weather in the country. Some of the best beauty, natural beauty in the country. Ocean, mountains, everything all there, desert and all that. So, it just can't be beat. And people who have not lived there don't get it. They don't understand what they're really missing, So there's a lot of us, as we now know, Arizona, Tennessee, Florida, Texas.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and California it's the most beautiful state in the union. Just like you said, it's You got the mount. I mean, when I was in Fresno County, you could drive 2.5 hours to San Luis Obispo, go west, or you could just drive 40 minutes and you're in the Sierras and you can go skiing at one of the resorts. I mean, it was
Yeah.
that nice. We also had a big. Most people don't know this, but Central California is like the Bible Belt of California. You have so much ag. If you drive down the 99, you get over the Grapevine, you keep going north. You got Bakersfield, you got Delano, you got Selma, you got Kingsburg, you got all these places, and it's huge ag, almond country, dairy country, Raisin City. I mean, it is. Most people they just think, oh, beach, right, or Golden Gate, but right in the middle, you got this, So,
Yeah.
well, that's cool.
Yeah, I was stuck, unfortunately, in LA, which is probably well, I guess I would say San Francisco is probably the armpit of California, but LA is a close second. They're the two armpits,
Yeah.
And I had lived in Orange County for a decade, and so there's nothing like Orange County. It's just the most gorgeous area to live in by the beach.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, because I lived in LA for a few years when I was doing acting. Oh, I mean, I'm still an actor, but when I was really pursuing it when I first got down there, I was living in Marina Del Rey, and then I was in Beverly Hills. And you can't beat that. And we would spend our time in Santa Monica. But then you got into Venice, and it was like this was the time when dispensaries were starting to pop up, and you were walking through a cloud of smoke, and that was 2007. I can't even imagine what it's like now. I mean, it probably does look like Escape from LA when Snake is.
It is a pit. Oh yeah. The homeless have just taken over Venice. It's horrible. And in fact, we were living in West LA, which was a pretty removed, decent part of town. But the homeless started encroaching even in West LA by the time we were leaving. In fact, one of the immediate reasons why we left was during the riots, the George Floyd riots. They were down our street in Beverly Hills. We were Beverly Hills adjacent, and the reality hit home to me that I'd always understood riots as taking place in other areas, the more criminal areas or the lower class neighborhoods, et cetera. But when they were starting, and when Antifa was starting to say, we're going to come down the suburban streets, and they did start doing that, I realized, oh my gosh, this is real now. These riots can actually come down our street, and they could, seek to destroy our properties and our lives. And I also realized I wouldn't be able to protect us very well because, if I did protect my wife and I against the violence, I would be the one going to jail. And that was another major reason why I thought we got to get out of this place. If it's the last thing we ever do.
Yeah, exactly, man. It turned into upside down world. I mean, it really did. And I was a cop. I was a cop at one point in California. Wow. Yeah, in Madera, California, about 20 minutes north of Fresno. And it was gangs and drugs and farm workers. So it was wild. But when Newsom started changing the laws, coke and meth were all getting kicked, and heroin got all kicked to misdemeanors, I went, okay, the game's changing. That was about 2015, I think that's when that was. And you started to see a lot of guys that were on parole were getting kicked down to probation. You go, okay, so a lot of guys were getting these deals, they commit these violent crimes, and they'd be put on probation or parole. And so, I mean, it was getting pretty wild. I got in plenty of fights. Here's the thing. I never looked for fights. I was never one of those guys. Always used my verbal judo, if you will, and it was my last resort. But they got to a point where these guys got so emboldened, they would just go, oh, I don't care. I'm going to go after this guy because what's going to happen to me? I'm going to get probation. I'll get 3 hots and a cot. I'm good to go. Who cares? And I'll be out, this time next week, just walking around the streets again. So, yeah, it was wild. Well, we got out, buddy. We got out. Here we are.
Amen.
Amen. That's right. Well, shoot. I actually I haven't started reading Chronicles of the Nehphilim yet. I just got it. I'm a screenwriter as well. I actually just won an award for screenwriting, which was, it took me a year.
Congrats.
That's right, baby. I got it right back there, Nashville Film Festival. Very exciting. Nice. So, I'm so blessed to connect with you because you're a Christian, you're a screenwriter. So I gotta pick this guy's brain. And you had alluded to it earlier talking about your novels, and I do want to talk about Cruel Logic in a little bit, but talking about screenwriting and novels, you're talking about like, oh, the Christian community wouldn't touch it, the the secular community wouldn't touch it because it fell into this weird realm, which leads me
Yeah.
to this book right here. In your book, Hollywood Worldviews, Watching Films of Wisdom and Discernment, you have some amazing insight. I mean, you really bring up some great points. There's a couple terms that you used, and I went, "That's what." There's cultural and there's a cultural anorexic, and then there's a cultural glutton. So
Yeah.
if you can, I read it. I go, he's totally right on this because this is where my brain goes. We have the Pure Flix crowd over here,
Yeah.
and right, we got the Pure Flix crowd over here, and then we're going, but we like to watch John Wick too. So
Yeah.
what do we? And there's violence in the Bible, like you said. I mean,
Yeah.
you got Ezekiel, you got in Isaiah. Yahweh's calling Israel the whore, the harlot, and is using graphic terms to describe the old covenant bride. So so people they kind of blush a little bit when you say, well, you realize that God calls Jerusalem or Israel a whore. He's calling her names because she's a harlot. She's committing adultery with these idols.
Yeah. Ezekiel 16 and 23 tell a fictional story of Israel and Samaria, or I'm sorry, Judah and Israel, and you're right, he describes them as whores, having sex with every deity that passes on the highway, and then it talks about them gang raping her and cutting her body up and such. So you're right. One of the factors that drove me to write that book, Hollywood Worldviews, was precisely at the time that I felt that there was, and there still is, though less of it, these two extremes where, Christians will say, "Oh, I don't watch any TV or any movies because sex and violence," and they don't watch any of it. Then the other side, which is sort of like it's just entertainment, and they both are uneducated and both are being manipulated. And I felt when I was studying screenwriting as a screenwriter, reading all the books, following the storytelling gurus, I realized that what they were saying was that storytelling is about redemption. And the redemption in a story is very much exactly like how I was taught from the Bible to give my personal testimony of conversion, how I changed my mind from seeing the world one way to another way, and what were the life circumstances that caused that to happen. And I realized that there's such an affinity between storytelling and the Bible and Christian redemption that I wanted to help Christians and Jews, any religious people who like the Bible. I wanted to show them that, or teach them how to see how worldviews are communicated in stories and in movies and in television and even in songs, if you think about it, right? But these two extremes would be the difficulty, right? Those who wouldn't even watch it, and then those who watch too much without discernment.
Sure.
And I felt that if you could, it's sort of like art appreciation. You can watch a movie and just absorb it and be controlled by it, or if you understand what's going on in the story, you know what to look for. You know what to look for the protagonist. What is their internal flaw? What are they seeking? What's their goal? What is the what is the external goal that the villain's trying to stop the hero, and how that all works together to create the redemption or the redemptive storyline for the hero. And some people have heard of the hero's journey, by Joseph Campbell and such. It's similar to that. And there's a sort of universal paradigm of the hero's journey, and it really does reflect personal redemption. Now, personal redemption is not an exclusive Christian concept. There is humanist redemption. There is, atheistic redemption, right? They would believe that everybody has a notion of the creation, fall, and redemption within their worldview. So an atheist, we know the Christian version of that, but the atheist version would be, or the secular humanist version might be, the problem with man is Religion had, man was in an evolved state. He was free, and then religion came and bound man up. And so now redemption, we find redemption by freeing ourselves from the restrictions, arbitrary restrictions of power that religion forces upon us. That kind of a thing. And so the question is what is the redemption that's being taught in the story? And when you learn about storytelling, you realize that in order to effectively communicate redemption, you must accurately depict the evil from which you're being redeemed. And that's where the sex and violence comes in, where while I would agree that, this is nuanced, we have to draw lines, we have to discuss this stuff. Nevertheless, if you don't accurately depict the sin that you're being redeemed from, the power of your redemption has no impact on people. Yeah. And and you have to realize that the sins that are depicted in the beginning of the story are often in the hero's life are often the sins from which he's being redeemed, whether it's adultery or whether it's murder or what have you. This character we have to show him before his redemption and after. And that's really no different from the Bible, is it? Right? We see whether it's David committing adultery with Bathsheba or having her husband murdered, right? Or, when he's worshiping God and when he's in a redeemed state. Yeah. So that's just the nature of storytelling. As people can understand that, they can realize the purpose of some of that evil and sin depicted in movies is not just gratuitous. It's actually can be beneficial. Now, that doesn't mean, therefore, it's all acceptable. No, I'm not saying that, but I'm trying to help Christians have a better, more biblical foundation upon which they can begin to assess movies with more wisdom and discernment. But of course, it's been, boy, when that book first came out, it was like 20 years ago, and a lot has changed. I think that a lot of Christians have become more wise and more discerning, and I think there's more of an intelligent observation of movies that I'm actually grateful to see. So I'm grateful for that.
And I think you're right, Brian, because what I think happened too? I think 2020 happened, and all of a sudden there was a complete and I always said this, is when you start, like everyone was just kind of going along, going, no big deal. That'll never happen here. That'll never happen here. And it's kind of like what you were alluding to earlier, like that stuff happens over there. It doesn't happen here. But once it hits close to home, you go, oh, shoot, this is happening here. And then once you start attacking, because a lot of people have child worship. So once you start attacking what their children are learning and it's getting back to the parent, they go, wait, hold the phone. You can do all that over here, but now you're attacking my kid. What are you teaching them? Everybody got red pilled, right? They all got red pilled. They went, wait, I got to get more involved. I got to see what's going on. So as a lot of people saying, oh, it's getting worse, worse, and worse, I feel like that ship is starting to turn a little bit where you go, no, people are waking up. They're seeing this. Yeah, they're waking up. They're seeing this. And now they're checking whatever website, whatever discernment website they need to go, do I need to go see what's in the Barbie movie? What's in what's in this film over here? What's going on with the new Avengers? Because even with Endgame, they slip a little something in there, and you go, oh, okay, but you almost don't notice it because we're so used to it, right? We're so used to it. And Vodi Bakum had talked about it a long time ago about that those two Harvard professors back in like 1990. They said this is how you take over the culture. What you do is you have to jam and desensitize. And you can see it in the 90s on TV. You would get jammed. You go, what was that? Did we just see that? And then you started getting desensitized to it. Now it's just normal, just the way it is. I mean, so what?
That's strategy. That's a strategic way for what I call subversion in my book. And what that means is the subversion is sort of the universal historic means by which every storyteller influences their culture. They draw from the well-known images or symbols or concepts or stories that are known by the culture, and they retell those stories, but they invest them with new meaning, or they change the definitions, and they do it subtly at first, but eventually that's how you ultimately control the culture. And by the way, that's what everybody does, including the Bible. The Bible did that as well. The Bible used a lot of pagan concepts like Leviathan, the sea dragon of chaos, which was a concept that was existing in all the ancient cultures long before Israel. But it's a symbol in the Bible that's used to describe the world without God, or the unknown, or the desert, or the sea, these worlds that we can't control as little human beings, but our God can control the chaos. He creates his order out of chaos, right? So the sea dragon Leviathan shows up in the Bible, right? God simply took images that were known and he invested them with his own meaning. In the same way, as we know, Hollywood retells Bible stories like Exodus, Gods and Kings, or the Noah movie, where they're told by atheists and they make God out to be a crazy mad man in a very real sense, and they invest it with new meaning. So retelling stories with new meaning is sort of the essence of subversion, but it's really what we all do because you want to, we're part of the culture that we are, right? And so you draw from those images and things that are very common. Just like I've written or told a vampire story. Yeah, that's common in our culture. Horror stories, common in our culture. But we can retell those stories and invest them with our own worldview, just like everybody else does.
Yeah. Brian, you almost sound like a presuppositional apologist with what you're talking about. How, yeah, I think you may have read Bonson maybe a couple of times because as you're talking, you're telling me that they're borrowing from our worldview, right? These guys are borrowing from the Christian worldview, and you make an amazing point in this book, Hollywood Worldviews. You talk about the Christ mythology. Not saying that Christ is a myth, but yeah, expound upon that, the Christ
Sure.
mythology in the film. And you did use a great example. I think it might be the best one, was with Neo in the Matrix and Trinity in
Yeah.
the Matrix and all these guys. I went, oh shoot! I saw this, but you expanded upon it so much more, and you gave it a name, the Christ mythology. Well, that was Neo. That was the Christ mythology.
Yeah, yeah.
But
And because I think that the Christ myth is really, in a way, it's a reflection of the hero's journey, which is a very universal journey.
yeah,
And Christ, as the creator, become flesh, it would make sense to me that he would embody the most universal journey that there is, which is the hero's journey, right? And so it's not like the hero's journey existed before Jesus. It was embedded within creation itself, I would argue. In fact, that's what I do argue.
okay,
But so in the same way uh, the the Christ story is the individual who comes to understand their identity as being the chosen one in some manner or capacity, right?
uh,
And that they bring redemption to their people who are in bondage in some way. And of course, that's a concept that applies throughout all of history, right? I think that's why it's one of the most powerful storylines. Now, of course, Jesus Christ story is somewhat different in that he was not a sinner himself. He did not need to get redeemed. But
right,
nevertheless, that Christ figure becomes the example in some manner or form for all of us, right? And I
yeah,
think that it's just a universal desire for all of us to be special, to be chosen in some capacity, and that Christ figure becomes the emblem of freedom that we seek, and it embodies that. And so it doesn't surprise me that the godless will take that concept and employ it with their own purposes in mind. And yeah, the Matrix, even though it's a little bit old now, but they there are plenty of movies that still continue to do the same thing. But what
oh
was
yeah,
so intriguing to me about Matrix was it it unabashedly used Christ symbolism, and the storytellers even told us that. But it was subversive in that they were actually in the storytellers, the Wachowski brothers. were actually Nietzschean. They admitted they were Nietzschean in their worldview, and they were simply using the Christ story as a means of self-salvation, that we can all save ourselves. We can all become like Neo, right?
Yeah.
So they were subverting the Christ story for their humanism. And that's a very common thing. So Christians are mistaken when here's the other side of the coin that I think modern day Christians, now they've become more educated on storytelling, but there's this sort of uh, movement or whatever within that for Christians to find Christianity in everything, right? Or like, oh, that, finding the Christ, like you find, oh, Neo's like a Christ. Yeah, he's a Christ story. He's a Christ story. And you're like, well, wait a minute. That's not the Jesus Christ story. It's Antichrist story, And so we have to be able to able to discern. Just because there are some good values in a movie, we should point those out. But that doesn't justify everything in the movie. It doesn't mean you should just embrace it all without really discerning, right? And I see a lot of Christians doing that now, where it's just sort of like, sort of like justifying watching bad stuff so that they can say, oh, I can see the Christian imagery in here while there's pornography or something, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, and that's exactly right.
Again, it's not black and white though, because there's been a lot of debates and struggling over these R-rated movies and how much do you depict of sin,
Right.
and there's a lot to talk about. I don't think it's all just black and white issue. There's a lot of nuance for sure.
Oh no, you're so right, because we live in a fallen world. We live in a rated R world. So
yeah.
me as a cop, I'm going to depict reality, right? Because a lot of people want to do like writers that are Christian writers. They're trying their best, and it's almost like they're doing an imitation of what they think happens, but they want to clean it up. And you go, well, that you're just giving me cardboard cutouts. I'm going to put flesh and bones on this guy because he's unapologetic with what he says, and that's so my script, The Rifle Brothers. It's what the log line is two ex-wrestlers turned bounty hunters muscle their way. In the year 1992, two ex-wrestlers turned bounty hunters muscle their way through small town America to investigate the murder of the daughter of an infamous televangelist. So these guys are going into the underbelly of small town USA, and they're dealing with, they have informants, they have drug addicted prostitutes. And I've been around all these people, and they're not going to say, they're not going to talk like, well, gee, Rusty, what you been up to, friend? That's not the world we live in. And it seems very like, this doesn't seem real to me. And especially someone who has been redeemed, right? They used to be in that context. Then they're redeemed. They may speak that way now, but they might slip a little bit by saying, an SH word or maybe an S word, right? And you go,
well, that's the problem I've always had with the Christian genre of films. I'm not against Christian stories. I do it myself, right? But I've always had a problem with the Christian world of movie making and films, because they have these prudish sort of I wouldn't almost arbitrary, right? Like what you can and can't have. And I know for a longest time you could never show a man drunk or drinking. And it was just nowadays they're more able to do that. But for the longest time you couldn't do that. And it was just ridiculous, because so many people struggle with real drinking. If you can't depict that in a movie, you're right. You end up having these Christianized versions of bad guys, which look like something out of the 70s television. You know what I mean? Bad guys from 1970s television. And it's just terrible, and we still have those issues, and I'm not against all of them, because you have a market, you have an audience, but the restriction, it's not just that they're restrictions, it's that they tend to be sticking head in the sand type of, we don't want to see certain kind of sins, we don't want to hear bad language, because and yet all around you there is that bad language. And so how can you depict a gang member in today's world and not have him cussing? It just it just isn't real at all.
It's not real at all, and I think it's almost it's disingenuous, and it's almost borderline offensive, where I go,
Yeah.
gosh, that guy does not talk like that. He wouldn't talk. I mean, I used to do some preaching over at Teen Challenge. I don't know if you guys have a Teen Challenge over there, but these are some rough dudes. They've all are in a rehab center, but it's all Christ centered. And I mean, there's tattoos on these guys' faces and everything else. And you talk to them, they're raw. They're raw, but they're trying to figure out, okay, they're asking amazing questions, right? About the Bible. They're asking about, okay, can you tell me, how is Jesus deity? Okay, let's go to John 1. Hey, let's go to Genesis. Let's go to Old Testament. Let me show you from over here where he is he's pre-incarnate Christ. You see here, who is Yahweh? Oh, okay. And then they'll say, oh, they'll get blown away and they'll say a cuss word. They go, I'm so sorry. I go, dude, it's okay. It's okay. Don't worry, man. You're not going to get struck dead. You're okay. Don't worry about it. These men are a work in progress, and you got to show them some grace, because such were some of us, right? So, with that, gosh, time flies, doesn't it? With that, so for you wrote My Son Hunter, okay? So Robert Davi, he directed the film. Robert Davi was on Die Hard. He was on one of the James Bond films. He's been on tons of Goonies, Predator 2. I mean, this guy's he's been everywhere. I would say he's that guy in that movie. When you see him, that's that guy. He's on that one thing. But I'm a movie buff, so I know who he is. I'm like, oh yeah, he was on this, this, and this. Now, did he shoulder tap you, say, hey, can you write this? Or were you already writing it? You sold it? How did that work for you?
Actually, the producers, I had worked with the producers on several projects beforehand. One of them was I did a rewrite of a movie that became Obamagate, which were it was the texts of the two FBI agents, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, I think her name was. Yeah. And it was their texts that were released under FISA, what do they call it? Freedom of Information Act or something. Anyway, about how they were trying to take down President Trump before the 2016 election, in the FBI, right? And it was just so amazing, but also kind of entertaining, because they were having an adulterous love affair, right, at the time. And so, yeah, they dramatized that, and I came in and did a rewrite, and we did a new version of it called Obamagate, and that was where Dean Cain and who's the other one? Kate. I forgot the actress.
What?
Christine Swanson. Yes, I'm sorry. Anyway, they did it on stage as a play. It was really quite entertaining. So I'd worked with them before, and just they called me up. My gosh, when was it? Before, I don't know, 2019, I guess, or something. And they just said, look. Or no, 2020, because I moved to Texas, and they're like, we want to do a movie on Hunter Biden's laptop. That's all we know, and it's not and we don't want to do a documentary. We want to do a narrative feature, but they didn't know what. So they said, come up with some ideas, and so I did. I came up with some ideas, and they liked one of them, and the one that we have. And my angle on it was this: it was, look, this is something that's, and at the time. Remember, it was still being censored by all the national news medias, except for the few independent journalists and such.
Sure.
But the information on there was so damning, but also so important, right? Yeah. But there was a lot of it, and it was complex. All the connections were really complex. So I'm thinking, this is going to be, I don't want to do a documentary anyway, so I'm glad they didn't want to either. And I thought, how can we handle a lot of information but do it in an entertaining way? And secondly was we were all interested not in doing a hit piece on Hunter Biden. And that's what Hollywood does when they do hit
Yeah,
pieces on
sure.
Republicans when they do movies, right? But we
Yeah,
actually thought, you know what? There's something very fascinating about him. He's a very interesting, tragic hero, almost Shakespearean in that sense, right? Because
yeah,
here he's this failure of a son, and there's a very much of a sort of a mafioso relationship going on there. And also there's the dead brother who had died, and he was the
oh,
perfect son. And Hunter was the F up son, right? And so there was this trio relationship, father-son relationship going on with these brothers. And very tragic though, too, you know. So we wanted to deal with his his addictive personality. Sure, we're going to have a little bit of the sex on there and the drugs and stuff, but and that's where the humor comes in as well. But it really wasn't about like, oh, look at all the sex and stuff, the drugs that he's doing. It was like, look at this tragic character who has everything, and yet he destroys himself and his own family even. Or let's put it this way, he's doing the behaviors that would normally destroy the family, but because everyone's covering for the Bidens, he's getting away with it, right? So anyway, there's all these factors, and I thought, you know, what's the best way to handle all this stuff? And I had always been inspired by these comedic, dark comedy stories about complex issues that were political satires. I thought political satire is the way to go, like The Big Short. If you've ever seen The Big Short, you know, they're
yeah,
covering the whole housing collapse, and it's like
yeah,
all these details. Well, how do you do it? Well, you do it where you do it like a comedy, and you can jump in and out. You could break the fourth wall and talk to the audience. You can bring in all kinds of things that can help you deal with a lot of information and quickly, but also with an edge of humor. It makes it more entertaining, because that was the goal. We wanted to tell an entertaining story, and also Wolf of Wall Street. You know, very kind of similar in that sense. It was a horrible movie, but the technique of this dark comedy type of thing, and because I thought, look, I mean, an addictive person, a guy who's addicted to sex and drugs, that's the Hollywood glitz right up there, right up front.
sure.
But then there's that deeper familial tragic thing that's going on in the relationship, and so that was what we wanted, and so I wrote it, and then when we got the script to the point where we wanted it, then they found Robert Davi, and he came on board. But the interesting thing about it was that when the movie came out, all the left wing news media and film critics and all that, they of course hated it, which is a badge of honor to me, because I think they hated it because it was good. But what's interesting was several of them had actually said, it's really strange, but they kind of make Hunter Biden empathetic, which
I read that. I read
shocking.
that.
And some of them even thought maybe they didn't mean they probably were unwillingly showed him empathetically and didn't mean to. And they're like they're such idiots. They can't conceive of anybody doing something other than propaganda like they would do it. Like if I was doing propaganda, if I was doing stuff like this, I would do propaganda and make him look bad. It's like, no, you idiots. We're telling a great movie story, and that means having the hero, even though he's a tragic hero, that means he has to have some empathy for him. That's normal storytelling, right? So I was kind of proud of the fact that the leftists who hated it but were still begrudgingly admitted, well, they did make him out to be an empathetic hero. Well, yeah, that's protagonist, right? That not a hero, a protagonist. But yeah, so that's kind of interesting to me, and that felt good, you know. So
Yeah. Well, yeah, you know, and it's like we were talking about earlier. It's harkening back to not making that cardboard cutout and then just making a caricature of like, oh yeah, let's just get whatever we're hearing about the laptop and just throw it on there and make him look like a deplorable human, right?
What's interesting to me though is now all the stuff that is coming out now, and they're referring back to all these specific emails that show the business connection or the money he got. It's all in the movie. It's all nothing of it. There's very little of it that's new. All the revelations that are in the movie because it's been around, and so I'm kind of proud of the fact that Oh yeah, yeah, that's in the movie. Oh yeah, yeah, that's in the movie. So the movie is still very relevant. Nothing's really been disproven. And
Sure.
so yeah, I'm pretty proud of that.
Vindicated. All right. Nice. Good job. Well, right. So that's the thing is as a question I wanted to ask you that relates to this is so as a Christian writer, because early on when I was trying to navigate this, so the film that I started, Victory by Submission, the poster's back there. It's got has Eric Roberts on it, Fred Williamson, Alan Autry wrote and directed it. He was Bubba from In the Heat of the Night. He played my father in it, and actually he did a fantastic job. PTSD. He was an alcoholic. He gets redeemed, right? The redemption's there, and I want nothing to do with him. And I went, man. When I was doing it, I went at the time. This was a few years back. I went, well, why isn't at the end of the movie? Why don't we have the gospel at the end, right? And you go, and that's what I was still trying to figure out. I was like, every Christian movie should have the gospel. And I went, and as I started to kind of wise up and I'm watching good films, I'm like, well, it doesn't always have to be an altar call at the end, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't always have to be that. So I'm going, what's the balance? Because I have this script that I just wrote. And I got another one rattling around in my head that I would love to talk to you about. We'll talk about a different time, but I think you would dig the idea. Is I went, gosh, I got this idea for these bounty hunters that work with the cops. I got this corrupt televangelist. I've obviously been I'm an apologist. I do a lot of witnessing to Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, and I talk to and I'll do refutation videos on folks that give false prophecies that are in the charismatic movement. Not saying that it's all charismatics, right? I'm not saying that, but the
Right.
guys that say, says the Lord, Trump is going to be the president in 2020 or 2024.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. That's great, man. I didn't know that. I saw a couple of your Jehovah's Witness ones. They're great. You really do a great job of being gracious. But I didn't know that you were. I've actually said we need someone to be exposing some of these false
yeah,
prophets, man, because they need to be accountable. So send me some of the links. I'd love to
I'll,
watch them.
I'll send you a couple. Obviously, Justin Peters does some really good stuff. His channel is outstanding when it comes to that. But so I know a lot about the prosperity gospel preachers, and I went, write what you know, right? You listen to these lectures by Robert McKee or Sid Field, and if you subscribe to the channel Film Courage, I don't have any stock in that channel, but it's a good channel, Film Courage, and a lot of the writers they have on there, they'll say, hey, write what you know, right? And I go, okay, cool. Well, I know Cop World, I know wrestling, WWE and territory wrestling. I'm like, I'm into that. I'm a dork, so I love that stuff. I went, how do I bring this all together? But I went, man, this is a dark world that I'm creating. What are the guardrails that I put on this? So I went, okay, I have my tenets that I'm gonna stick with. So I'm just kind of curious, like, what do you, as a Christian, as a writer, what is it that you kind of go off? Like, I'm not going to go this far, but I'm going to go here. Yeah. So what do you got?
Well, that's a tough question. I mean, yeah, well, okay. So, like, for instance, the Hunter Biden movie itself was like, how do you show a guy who's addicted to drugs and sex and with prostitutes and is partying, and you really have to show that without making it, pornographic, right? And so interestingly, they had shot the first 10 minutes. The only most of that stuff for the movie happens just in the first 10 minutes, where we enter into his world as a drug addict and sex addict and all that, and then we kind of get more into the other stuff and the relationships and stuff. But of course, that's the way you pull people in, right? But it's like, how do you show them going to a strip place or a dance club and all this stuff? Well, you can do that. In fact, we had debates about the first 10 minutes of the movie. I'm like, look, you guys, you can cut away a lot more often and show less of it, but still make the point. So a lot of it's in the cutting and the editing, what you're choosing to show and not show. So as a writer, I I don't describe, you don't describe everything that you see. A director can take a scene and make it pornographic or make it not pornographic, and it has nothing to do with the writing necessarily, right? You can, a lot of times we're writing love scenes or something like that. You don't really go into too much detail, right? Because you do leave that up to some of those things up to the actors and such. And so you might just say they make love in the heat of the night or something like that. So a lot of that is done when the director shoots, and it doesn't necessarily have to do now. When I'm writing something, I do write in such a way that I indicate you don't have to see things. I don't say you don't see her breasts or something like that, but I'll just say something like, he sees her curves and he's falls in love or something like that, and that
Yeah.
indicates that you're not showing everything.
Sure.
So it's the writing style itself can deal with sins, but deal with it, write it in such a way where it doesn't look exploitative. But in the end, it's still up. The director's going to shoot the way they want to anyway. So
Yeah, and you make a good point because I think people that are going to watch this and are watching this, you have to understand as writers, actors also will improv, and they're gonna ad lib to what
yeah,
you already wrote, and you go, I didn't write any of that, so that wasn't me. It's out of my hands. I mean, he used the Lord's name in vain. I didn't write that. He said that. That's not me. Even though my name's on there, I have no
yeah,
control over that, right? So,
yeah,
or like you said, the director, he goes, "Well, we need to show this," and you're fighting tooth and nail, going, "I don't think so." But
yeah.
ultimately, the writer is the redheaded
Oh,
stepchild,
oh
unless
yeah,
you're
yeah. I mean, I was grateful that they actually did include me. They allowed me to give feedback. Producers, normally I don't expect to see it to be seen anymore once the
sure,
script is handed in. So they were kind enough to do that, and I made my arguments for. I'm like, okay, look, this is your major audience is going to be a Fox crowd, or conservatives and Republicans, and regardless of the fact that we might be able to watch R-rated movies and it doesn't offend us, but they do, and so we have to keep that in mind or we're going to lose the viewers, right? We don't want to lose the viewers. So there's a balance there, and how do it's a balance. How do you deal with these things but not necessarily exploit them or show too much or excessively? I have an interesting story about language though, because this was with my Twin Wars. When I did research for the movie, now I don't have a problem with language of any kind, even blasphemy, because there's blasphemy in the Bible. If the Bible
yeah,
describes blasphemy out of the tongues of demons and evil people, well, then we can show that too, as long as we show that it's evil ultimately, right? And so, but nevertheless, I want to be historically accurate. So this is World War II, POWs, and the research that I was doing, the interviews with all these men who had been taken. For those who are watching, Twendall Wars is a true story of Western Allied soldiers, prisoners of war under the Japanese in the Pacific Theater in Thailand, Burma, which is roughly where you had the Bridge on the River Kwai story. That's the same sort
oh,
of
yeah,
story that we were telling. Well, anyway, my research, these men with these interviews did not cuss, and they were very respectful as they talked to, and as they told the stories of their experiences, right? So I didn't write any cuss words in there, but what you said is what happened was the modern actors, when they're trying to embrace their own anger and all that, they were like using the F word and stuff all over the place. And I'm like, no, they didn't use that. They didn't use that. And I didn't have a moral problem with it, but it was the case where the actors bring their own to the
yeah.
mix. And if the director doesn't stop them, it's there, right? And so at first I was really disappointed, but then I found out um, actually the guy who wrote the original novel, not novel, the original memoirs, his name was Ernest Gordon. We were telling his story. And, he was asked, the producer asked me, like, yeah, were you offended by the language? Was that unrealistic or something? He goes, oh, no, we cussed up a storm just like that. And it shocked me. And what I realized was, as I put two and two together, and I did some other reading, what I realized was, don't forget, this is the 1940s. And this is a time period where there was a more of a concept of a propriety in public, but not necessarily in private. And so
Yeah.
when you're in war and fighting war, yeah, you're going to do that. But then when you're in public and you're giving your interviews and telling your stories, you're going to be more proper about the way you're describing things. So you're not going to have all that cussing language. Nowadays, it's not the case, right? They just
No.
cuss all over the place. And so I didn't have a moral problem with it. I was a historical, but luckily it turned out to be accurate, even though the actors did their own thing and I was against it. So sometimes the writer can be wrong too. Well, I'll just admit that.
Hey, absolutely. No, I totally get it. Well, we only got a few minutes, so I want you to give a plug for your book, Cruel Logic, because I think it's a cool concept. Actually, tell us about Cruel Logic. This is your latest book, correct?
Yeah. So Cruel Logic is a theological thriller novel. What that is it's kind of like Silence of the Lambs, but with a Christian worldview, and it wrestles with the issues of morality, evil, and the existence of God unabashedly. I'm pitching it that way because I want people. I don't want people to be surprised.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it's a brutal story because what it is, the premise of it is, it was originally was written as a screenplay, won lots of awards years ago, but I could never get it made as a movie. And I finally had the time to adapt it into a novel so that the story, because I've always loved the story and I wanted to get it out there. And basically, the premise of the story is there's a serial killer on campus. He's a philosopher teacher. And what he does is he captures university professors and he debates them. And the topic of his debate is his moral right to kill them. So he'll capture a university professor, tie him up, and put a video on him and say, okay, if what you say is true about reality, give me one valid reason why I should not kill you, and I'll let you go. So, of course, he's a philosophy professor, so he's looking for ruthless logic here, right? And these are professors, they're evolutionary biologists, queer theorists, all these kinds of professors on campus. And, of course, are they able to defend their belief against murder with godless worldviews? Well, you'll have to buy the novel to find out. But nevertheless, you can tell that they don't do a very good job of it. And there's a professor, or there's a cop and a psychology professor tracking this guy down. And there's more to it than just proving this philosophical point. But nevertheless, one of the lead characters in the story is kind of like a Jordan Peterson character. He's a psychologist at the university, and he's defending Western civilization. And of course, if you know anything about the university, I depict the modern woke university with everything: BLM, Antifa, student protests, everything in there that's going on, Sex Week, all that accurately based on what's going on in the news to sort of show people what's really going on. And in the context of that environment, this psychology professor is trying to bring back Western Civ courses that they've kicked out long ago. All universities are anti-Western civilization. And of course, he's being attacked for it, students protesting against him. At the same time, he's trying to track down this killer who's interacting with him and the cop. And the point of it is that the theme of the story is ideas have consequences. And on the broader level, it's like when the universities have gotten rid of Western civilization, which includes God as the foundation for morality, what are the consequences of that? Well, we get the very violent world that the students are now. We now see they're becoming more and more violent as they go out into society, and all these things have consequences, right? And so I'm dealing not just with the philosophical, although I try to make philosophy entertaining. It's not just that; it's about morality, it's about the existence of God, and it's about the reality of the wokeness that is. Where did that come from? It came from our universities, and this is kind of what's going on. And that's there's several other minor stories that are going on there, but that's the big picture that I wanted to tell a story. So I wanted to make philosophy entertaining, and I wanted to tell a deep thriller story, a thriller story that has some deep thinking to it. And I think people will enjoy it. But I do want to warn people that, that there is language, because one of the, the F-bomb is in there, because if you listen to these campus students on campus and their protests,
Oh yeah.
the F word is a key part of their protests, and it's a key expression of their own violent hatefulness in their hearts. And if I didn't have that in there, it wouldn't capture their violence like it does. And so that's just one example of how I wrote that story. But yeah, so it's new release, and it's the first in a new series that I'm writing.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, no, it makes me, because I love Silence of the Lambs. It makes me think of Manhunter, which was later remade into Red Dragon.
And Seven, the movie
Yeah,
Seven.
Seven's definitely up there with those. Fantastic film. And then as you're talking, I'm thinking about Dexter a little bit.
Yep.
Where
Yep.
a lot of Dexter in there, but it's funny because you're making the point that these people have no basis for morality. If you're just from the slime, if you've gone from goo to you, then who cares? It's just protoplasm bumping into other protoplasm. So what's it matter? And Dawkins, I think it was Dawkins, he said that we're just dancing to our DNA. We're starting.
I think, I think another one of the reasons why I wrote it was ideas have consequences. All right. I've interacted throughout my Christian life with lots of atheists and unbelievers, and they all have a sense of morality, right? They all believe murder's wrong. They all believe, they have this, and they'll go, well, I'm an atheist and I believe in morality. And it's like, that's not the point. The point is you're believing contradictory things. Your atheism denies immorality, and then you act as if there is moral obligation that transcends our subjective experiences. In other words, racism really is wrong, no matter how many people are racist. No matter how many people think racism is right, it's still wrong, right? But if you're an atheist, you have no basis to say that. It's just sheer power. Everything comes down to power. Like you said, molecules in motion don't have morality, but they don't act consistently with their worldview, because their worldview does not provide the necessary foundation for that morality. And it's so frustrating, because it's amazing how many unbelievers just don't think about their thinking. They don't realize, they hold compartments separately. Like, here's my compartment beliefs about God, and here's my compartment beliefs about morality. And they don't realize that they're connected, and very intimately so.
Right, exactly. And it's like we were saying earlier, is that they have to borrow capital from the Christian worldview.
Yes.
We're borrowing this from you because this is wrong. Well, why is it wrong? Well, because, and you just work the ladder, right? You go, it's wrong. Well, because the cops say it's wrong. Where do the cops get the law? The government. Okay, where's the government? And then you go, they get this from God. So you're reasoning with them. The standard of truth is the Bible. And I think it was Dahmer. I think it was Jeffrey Dahmer who said, if I'm from the slime, who cares? I can do whatever I want.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
I want to say two things. One is, I have an Easter egg on my website, Godawa.com. I actually made a short film about one of the scenes from this story years ago called Cruel Logic, and it's on my website. You can find it. But then secondly was, you mentioned Greg Bonson earlier. I actually dedicated this novel to Greg Bonson because of his influence on my life. And in fact, I got his son, Dave Bonson, to endorse the book as well. So
excellent. That's awesome, man. Wow. Well, Brian, we're getting into the witching hours now, my friend. I am so blessed to have had you on. This has been awesome.
Very nice to meet you, Brett.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I hope we can do this again, man. We could talk some movies. We could definitely talk eschatology, because that's something I really want to get into, because your book is just fabulous. I mean, I took so much away from it, and Uncle Gary DeMar, I got I got all of his books on my shelf. And what might couple, yeah, exactly. What might couple well with Cruel Logic is his new book that just dropped, which is, correct me with the title. It's why it's okay to eat your neighbor, I think is what it's called. Or
by Gary. Yeah, I inspired him to finish that novel because I said, Gary, I want to use the first three because he told me about that book. He was writing it for years and he just never got back to it. He wrote the first 5 chapters. And I'm like, could I take those 4 chapters and offer it free to my readers of the novel? And he goes, yeah, sure. And I told him, like, this is like 6 months ago. I'm finishing up my novel. So he used that as inspiration to kick in the butt to finish writing the book because he's been wanting to. But I'm glad because it is such a great book and a great concept. Yeah. So check that out. You can get his book on AmericanVision.org.
I just ordered it. I ordered that. Yes, I think I ordered it yesterday, and I ordered Nehemiah Nesbitt's book, The Destruction of Jerusalem. I believe what it's called. Yeah. So I'm excited to read that. But
okay, look, have me on again, and let's talk all eschatology because it's very relevant too to like what's going on right now, and like all the and kooks who are now saying, "Oh, it's everything. The rapture's going to happen soon. We're in the last hours."
Yeah, it's Gog and Magog before our very eyes, like Glenn Beck said with Max Lucado, and the past 100 years, World War I. This is Armageddon. This is Gog and Magog. World War II.
Last generation. Yeah.
Oh yeah, the late great planet Earth, all that good stuff. But yes, Mr. Godawa, we're going to have another conversation very soon, my friend.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's make it happen. But so Godawa.com, is that where we can find?
Yep. And my books are exclusively on Amazon. So you can get all my books are in Kindle, paperback, hardcover, and audiobook. And I'm gonna they're all gonna be in large print within the next couple weeks. Okay. So they're all exclusively on Amazon. You can go there.
Excellent. Okay, so where can we find To End All Wars and My Son Hunter? Are those available?
To End All Wars is Amazon Prime for free. Okay. And My Son Hunter can only be, nobody in Hollywood would ever distribute that. So you have to go to mysonhunter.com to buy the DVD or watch it digitally online.
Yeah, wow. This is why Christians need a parallel economy. We gotta we gotta start getting more distributors doing this. I know Lord TV. I'm hoping to get Marcus Pittman on here. Him and I can talk, and then there's more coming up. There's more coming up out of the woodwork. So I think, like I said, the ship's turning a little bit for us. But yeah, man, that's why we got to try and win the culture war. Write our own stuff. We got to be that voice crying in the wilderness, if you will, saying, "Hey, we're here. We're not going to hide anymore. We're not getting our holy huddles. We're not looking into the sky waiting to get whisked away." I mean, we got work to do. So anyway, Mr. Godawa, I'm going to link all of your stuff in the description, Godawa.com. I'm going to link your Amazon stuff in there as well, because people need to get your books. They definitely need to get the End Times Bible Prophecy. It's not what they told you. I just love that book. But anyway, sir, thank you so much. And those of you that are watching, remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Share this video. And do you have any socials? Instagram, Facebook?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, and I have a blog at my website. You can sign up. If you go to Godawa.com, you can sign up to get my updates and stuff and access my blog and stuff. I'm not a heavy social media guy, but I do it. Facebook and Twitter, mostly.
Beautiful. All righty, sir. Thank you. Yeah, X. Yeah, it's X now. All righty, sir. Let's do this again. We'll talk soon, okay, my friend?
You bet.
All right, Mr. Godawa. Thank you, brother. Have a good night, okay?